Hi, it's Tim Wilson from Red Rocket Studio. What we're going to do in this project is we're going to make these amazing 3D spheres. They're going to look quite realistic, but we're going to do the whole thing in Illustrator using vectors. And I want to show you, first of all, how to do the 3D side, but then how to make something look realistic with shadows and highlights and reflections. This is one of the projects from our course, the Udemy course, and you'll see there's links down the bottom to that course, over 12 hours of training. Now let's jump straight in and make some amazing 3D spheres. So let's have a look at creating some spheres, and we're going to do that using the, first of all, effects, and we're going to be using revolve in there. Now the problem with a sphere obviously is that if you just create a little ellipse like this, and well, let's give it a different color so that it'll be easy to see in here, and we'll make it green with a yellow surround, and I go along to effect, down to 3D and revolve. Well, it will revolve it, but what it does is it pulls it out and makes it basically into a donut shape. So we really don't want that. We want a really nice rounded sphere. So I'm going to cancel this, and let's go and get rid of this and start once again. So to make a sphere we need half of a circle. I'll get an ellipse. I'm going to draw my ellipse in. I'm holding down the shift key so I get a perfect circle. I think I'll do this one without a stroke, so let's have no stroke on there, and I'll just give it some color in here. Let's take a blue. So I want to halve this, and there's various ways of doing this and cutting objects in half. I'm going to use a nice simple way, and that's going to be to use a rectangle. Put a rectangle over half of my shape. You can see how it nicely snaps onto the middle. Select both parts, and then I can either use the pathfinder to subtract the front from the back, or I could go along to the shape builder tool, hold down the Alt key and drag over both of them. I'll just use the pathfinder to subtract the front object from the back object. That gives me this really nice half of a circle. So now I can go to Effect, 3D and Revolve, and you can see it revolves it into a perfect sphere. Now you might find yours looks a funny shape, and that could be because it's actually offset from the wrong side. If I change that to offset from the right, you'll see it will offset from the other side in there. I'm going to keep mine on the left. So I've now got my shape in there, but what I'd like to do is to put a little bit of artwork on it, and I'm thinking in terms of billiard balls, something with maybe a number in there. So to do that, I'll just OK this. I'm going to take some artwork and put it into the, if we can find them, I'm going to put it into my symbols panel. So let's find the symbols over here. I will make the artwork, and I'm just going to use a little circle like this. I'm going to make my circle, I think I'll do it white, or maybe just slightly off-white in there, and I'll put a number in there as well. So I'm going to go along to my type tool and just click. I'll do a number 8, and I'm going to make that a lot larger. So let's pull that right out, make it quite big, and pop it on there. Now I take both of those and I drop them back into the symbols panel. Now when you get to this stage, once again, don't worry about anything in here, just click OK, and we can get rid of that now. So to put the number onto the sphere, we need to go back to the sphere. Now if I click on the sphere, you'll see that I can then get in the appearance palette here to the effect that I used on it. I'll click the 3D revolve effect. That takes me back into there again. You might find that you need to switch on preview if you're not seeing what it's doing. I'm going to click map artwork, and in the symbols at the top here, I'm going to choose my number 8. It's on the wrong side, but that's not a problem. I can just move it across in here until I get it into the right position. Now you can see the lighting is coming down onto my sphere from this top right hand side, but the number 8 is just flat art. So I'm going to switch on shade artwork, and that will then shade any artwork that you put in there as well, and it looks like it's a lot more accurate. We'll click OK, OK again, and there is my first of the billiard balls. But of course what I want to do is to have some more of these shapes, maybe different colors. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key and make a copy of this one. Now this one's going to be a bit bigger, so I'm going to scale it up, but look what happens when I start to scale this. Hold down the Shift key and you can see how the artwork remains the same size. Now there is a little option that fixes that for you. If you go along to the properties, make sure you're in transform. If you can't see it, click on these 3 little dots, and that will then show you an option where you can scale, stroke and effects. So with that switched on, this time when I scale this, it will scale the artwork, which is the whole effect, as well. All I've now got to do is to change the color of that one. Let's make that orange. Hold down the Alt key, make my next one over here. Let's bring that forward a little bit. Over here, I'm going to scale that up. And once again, I can then change that. So I just once again make sure that scale artwork and effects is switched on. And I'll change the color on that. And let's go with a more of a brightish color. Well, the pink will do. Anyway, get up to that stage there. So remember, make your ellipse first, cut in half, maybe do your artwork, put it into the symbols panel, go into the effects, down to 3D and revolve. Remember, if you need to go back in there again, don't go to effects a second time. Get to the effect by clicking it in the appearance panel. And then you can make copies of this. And if you want to scale them with your artwork as well as the effect, make sure that in the transform option, you click on the little scale artwork or scale stroke and effects, should I say. Have a go with that, and then come for the next stage where we're going to put some shadows under these objects. So let's make some shadows for these now. And there are a number of ways of making shadows. One way, which you can make a very simple shadow, is you can go along to an ellipse. And if I put a solid color on this ellipse, like a black, in there, I can then go up to the effects. I can go down to blur, and I can put some blur onto that shape. And you can see I can blur it a little bit like that. If you blur too far, you start to see the edge around there, but a little bit of blur would be fine. Click OK, and that gives me a very simple little shadow which I could then go and place underneath the shape. I'm just going to send it to the back by going to Object, Arrange, and Send to Back, and we get something like that. I'd like to go a little bit more accurate than that, but before I do, some of you might be thinking, well, what about a drop shadow effect? Well, let's have a look at the drop shadow effect. If I go to Effect, I go down to Stylize, and there's a drop shadow in there. You can see what the drop shadow effect does is it puts the shadow around the entire shape. So it just won't look accurate at all. The type of shadow that I like to do is actually with the blend tool. I'm going to go along and I'm going to get an ellipse, and I'm going to draw a large ellipse like this, and I'm going to make that ellipse black. I always like to make my shadows black if it's a solid object, because I can always change the opacity. I never start with grey, always with black. So let's start off with that one there, and I'm going to make a copy of that. So I'll hold down the Alt key to make a copy and make this one a lot smaller. So this is going to be a smaller version of that shape. Now, because the light is coming from the top left hand corner, I actually want more shadow over on the left hand side. So I'll move the center bit over here to the top or to the right hand side of my shadow. Now, I'm going to take the big circle over here, just the big one, and I'm going to change the opacity on that to 0. So we've got two shapes here. They've both got black as their color, but one is 100% opacity and the second one, the bigger one, is 0. If I select both of those and go to Object, Blend and Make, well, we don't get much of a shadow because what it's done is it's taken a smooth color, so it's gone from there to semi-transparent to black. But if you go back to Object, Blend, and your blend options and change from smooth color into specified steps, you can put in as many steps in here as you like. I'm just going to put in 200 and click OK, and you see now we get this really nice smooth from black through to transparent, and it is transparent, it's not white. You'll see if I were to move it on top of that shape, you can see through it. Now the reason I do it out to transparent rather than white is because if I want to change my background color, well, if I'd gone to white, it would just look very, very strange. So if I've got a shape or a shadow like this, once again, you can see it still doesn't look that accurate. So I'm just going to go along here to my, let's try that again. So I'm going to go along to my opacity and just reduce the opacity as well as change it from the top to the bottom. So I'll go from Object, Arrange and Send to the back. It's starting to look better now, but it's still not quite right. You see, when you have a shape, a solid shape like this, there's generally a very dark area right underneath the object. Not big like that, but really, really quite dark. So I can make another copy of this one, make this one smaller. There's no right or wrong with the size here, just do what you think. And we'll make this one less transparent. So I've got this one here, and I've got this one, which is going to be right underneath my shape for the original darkness. And then the bigger one, I can maybe make a little bit less solid. So we get this really nice shadow effect coming through. Now, of course, we want the same for that one there, because at the moment it looks like it's floating. So I can select both of those, hold down the Alt key, maybe reduce the size of these two, and move them across under that one. And if I could see the last ball there, I'd do the same to that. In fact, I'll move it across to here, and let's put that one more in the distance and do the same thing again. Select both of those, hold down the Alt key, pop it under there, but maybe make it a little bit smaller still as well. I'm using the arrow keys to just move this around, so on my keyboard, to get it exactly where I need it. So do have a bit of a go with that. If things look like they are floating, just move them closer to the background or to the bottom of their shadow. And try two shadows in there. Use the blend tool to do it. So a bigger circle and a smaller circle, both of them black to start off with. Take the bigger circle, take the opacity down to 0, select them both, and it's Object, Blend and Make, and then change your blend steps to get a smooth blend between them. Try it out. Now that's great for solid shapes like billiard balls or snooker balls, but what about if we wanted something a bit more glassy or semi-transparent? Well, let's try this out. What I'm going to do is, rather than make a new document, I'm just going to make a new artboard. So I will zoom out a bit, and that's, remember, Command minus or Control minus, depending on whether you're Mac or PC. I'm going to move this up, so I'm holding down the space bar to move that up, and I will go along to my artboard tool. Now I only want to copy the artboard, not the artwork, so I'll switch off Move Artwork with Artboard and hold down the Alt key to make a copy of the artboard. I can now go over to my new artboard, and now rather than recreating one of these shapes again from scratch, I'm just going to pinch one that I've got up here. So let me select that with its shadow, hold down the Alt key and drag it down. Let's see what we can do with this one now. Well, the first thing is, because this is going to be transparent, I'm going to get rid of the 8 on here. So to do that, I click on the 3D shape. I go to 3D Revolve in the Appearance panel, and I can then go into my map artwork and I can just delete or clear the artwork from that. We'll click OK on that and OK again. So why can't we just change the opacity of the object to make it semi-transparent? Well, you can, but it doesn't really work very well. It kind of gives you just a very light sphere, and maybe you can see the background shape through there. What we really need is something which is transparent and maybe shows off a little bit of a reflection on here, so it looks almost like a glass ball. If the light is going to come through our shape, it will put a bit of a shadow over here, but the shadow won't be black and dark like this. The shadow will actually be a color, the same color as your shape. So the first thing I'm going to do is just move that out the way. I'm going to select my shapes down here, and I'm going to change the fill color to a blue. And you can see now we almost get a blue glow in there. Unfortunately, it's not dark enough, so I will go into my blue here. I'm going to double click it and I'm going to darken that blue down. Now I'm working in RGB, and to darken things down, I find if I'm in RGB mode, the fastest way to do that is to go to where it says RGB, choose HSB, that stands for hue, saturation and brightness. And in here I can then just choose to darken that down quite a lot. Click OK, and if we've chosen that color, you can see now we've got more of an interesting glow. This one here, I could choose a much brighter color as well. Unfortunately, because I've changed the blue in here, I should have made a copy. I'll just do another copy of that, and we'll have the brighter blue back once again. So something like that. Click OK. So this one here's the bright blue, and I've got the dark blue in there, and that's going to give me an interesting sort of effect where the light is almost coming through my shape and just casting a very small shadow, but it's going to be the blue shadow in there. Okay, so what about the shape itself? Let's have a look at what we can do to make a bit of a reflection on here to give it a glassy feel. Now, there's no right or wrong with reflections at all. Probably the best thing to do is to find something which is glass and has got a reflection, and then try and copy those reflections onto your shape. Now, if you do a Google search, you'll find plenty of items with reflections in them. And I've done that over here. I've just gone to Google, had a look to find a glass sphere. And I'll just bring it in, drag it into my document over there, and you can see the same sort of thing in here. So this has got a lot of shapes in there which are reflections of the surrounding scene. So that's what we're going to try and replicate. Let's start off with this large shape over here. So I will use my pen tool to do this, and I'm just going to draw the shape in. So I'll start over here, click and drag to get another curve in there, maybe down to here, back around to there, and down to the starting point in there. Remember, if this doesn't work for you, you can use the pencil tool if you like. You can move your handles around, you can get the shape exactly as you want it. There. Looking closely at this reflection, you'll notice that it goes from, well, it's not white, it's actually orange, through to a darker orange. There's a bit of a gradient going on there, and we could do exactly the same thing on our shape. So I will select my shape, and I'm going to go to the window menu, find the gradient panel, and I'm just going to apply a simple gradient to start off with. So you can either choose from here, or you can click on here to see your gradients. I'm going to pick a black to white one. So what I'd like is to have this going from white through to white. I'll double click on that side there, and that allows me to choose white to white. Now it's not much of a gradient going from white to white, but if I were to pick one of these sides and change the opacity, now it will go from white through to transparent. And then of course I can use my gradient tool and just drag this to any angle that I like. So I'm trying to roughly replicate what we've got over here. You can still click on your shape if you find that that's too bright in there. Go to the opacity and take your opacity down a bit, so we get something which looks more like that, that's closer to that shape there. Now have a look at the shapes that they've got. They've got another shape over here. There's one that goes right the way around the underneath. There's another shape in there. Just pick the ones that you want to, or you think would look quite good on your shape. And remember, you can move them around if they're not in the right position. So I am going to do another one at the bottom. So I'll start over here and just click and drag to make another shape going right the way around the bottom over here. Remember, don't worry about getting it perfect. You can always fix it later on. And I'll just take that out like that. And it doesn't have to be absolutely exact. I can move it around into the right position there. I can use my white selection tool, which is the direct selection tool there, to move any of these points around until I get the effect that I'm after. And because this is a gradient, I can choose the different types of gradients. So I can go with a center gradient, I can inverse the gradient, and I can use the gradient tool and just click and drag to put the gradient where I want it to go. Now that's showing up with a very nasty line down there. I'll just click on that point and maybe adjust those handles a little bit out, maybe like so. And let's take this one and make this a bit narrower in there. I'm really just looking at something which will almost give a reflection from the ground, and we'll take down the opacity of that. The problem with doing these type of shapes is when you are looking at them so closely, they don't look three-dimensional anymore. So once I've done a few little shapes in there, I tend to take a quick tea break and then come back and add some more shapes in to get the shape. It looks much better that way. Let's add a few more in here. So I'm going to go with this one here, a little shape down there. And back to that point over there. Once again, I'm going to do a gradient on there. I'll do a linear gradient from the edge, maybe, and I will change the opacity on that. Let's have one last one on this side here of the white gradients. So same again, down to here. I'll take it down to there and go back to that point. I'll leave that one as is. You'll notice there's a darker area down here. We can do the same thing. So I could just draw another semicircle over there. And maybe this one I will fill with black or use a black gradient. I'm going to choose the black gradient there, make sure both sides are black, but one side is going to be more transparent than the other side. And of course I'll just take down the opacity on that, and that'll give me the darker area at the bottom. Let's select all of those items over there, group them together, so object and down to group, and then we'll move them across on top of the little shadow glow area. Get rid of that one over there. And there we go. We've got something which looks a lot more glass-like than the hard-edged objects that we had over here. Let's zoom out a bit so that you can see both of them at the same time. So have a bit of a go with both types of these and try out a few more versions of this, because you can do it in different colors. Remember, once you've created one, if I hold down the Alt key and make a copy of that, as long as I can select that semicircle, and I will undo the group over here. So I'm going to just ungroup it so I can just select that semicircle there. I can change the color of that to anything I like, and the glass effect will still work on there. Same with this one over here. I can select these, move that over, and then have a pink shadow underneath it. Have fun with the 3D stuff and just enjoy it. So now we've got our 3D glass balls. I'd like to put a very subtle background behind this. I'm going to make a shape over here, and on that shape I'm going to put a subtle gradient. So I'm going to go into my fill, just choose any old gradient and click the gradient options button. Now in the gradient options button, what I can do is I can change this gradient, and I want it to go from white to a very light grey. So we'll have 3 of these little stops in there. This one is going to be white or almost white. This one here, I'm going to double click it, is also going to be white or almost white. And the middle one, which I'm going to double click, is going to be more of a grey colour. So you can just about see grey in there. But rather than going across, I wanted to go up and down. So I'll change the angle in here to 90 degrees. Now I can move that around, and you can see this middle is slightly more grey. If you wanted even more grey, just double click and choose a darker grey in there. So once I've got to this stage here, and I'm thinking, well, that's probably about right. That'll be in the background there. It's going from white through to grey through to white again at the top. Let's close this down, and I'm going to go to Object, Arrange, and send that to the back. And you can see now we've got this sort of slightly darker background in there. If you find it's too dark, feel free to just change it and lighten it up. You can go back to the gradient and lighten up that grey as well. The next thing though is I want these to be reflected on a very hard surface here. So I'm going to select just the 3D balls themselves. I'm going to deselect the background. So I'm holding down the Shift key and clicking on that background. So I've just got those selected. I'll hold down the Alt key to drag a copy, and then we can actually just pull the copy over itself like that. I'm going to move it into the right position. Now it's not accurate, but it'll be accurate enough. Now mine are not quite in the correct row, so I might find that I'm going to have to select them individually, deselect the background, and move them into the right position over there. Same with this one here. As long as they're grouped together, you should be able to do this without any trouble at all. That one's not grouped together, so let's just make sure that I select all of that. Deselect the outside and just move that up a little bit to the correct position. And then all of these can be changed in the opacity. So I'll go in and just adjust the opacity to lighten them up so we get just a hint of a reflection on there. Depending on how shiny you want that surface to be, you can adjust the opacity in here. I want mine to be just very, very subtle. The other thing that you can do in here is you could also go into the effects. You could go down to stylize, you could go down to blur, and you could apply a little bit of Gaussian blur on them. Not too much, but just enough to take off that harsh edge in there. And you'll find that'll sort of soften the effect. So rather than a harder edge, the harder surface you're on a slightly less harsh surface. Oh, you can see these ones have worked perfectly. That one, I didn't manage to select those items. So I just undo that over there, and maybe make sure that I select those when I do it. I'd like mine to be on quite a harsh surface in there. And depending on the angle that you're looking at, you can adjust the length of these. So once again, I could select all those shapes over here and just squash them in a bit more, which means that my viewpoint is further down. Once again, enjoy them. They're so useful in all types of circumstances, and they look very, very impressive. Now, here's a little bonus tip when you are working with shiny shapes. whether it's glass or anything that you want to shine. I'm going to go over to the shapes here, and I'm going to choose the flare tool. All I do is go to the most shiny part, click and drag out a little flare like that, and let's deselect that, and you'll see we've got this very subtle little shine in there. If I move it out, that's what we've actually putting in there, that little shine in there. So I can just place it wherever I want it. Now you can change it to different sizes as well. You can move it around based on what you want. So this one here, let's go with a slightly bigger one this time, and you can see I get more of a shine on that. If I want a hard, very hard edge like glass, try and keep your flares really small in there. A small flare will just give you a very, very harsh edge to your shape, and it looks like there's almost a sun hitting that directly. You can put these not just on the shiny parts, but if you've got, for example, a glass as in a tumbler glass, you could use this on the edge. So when you put it right on the edge, it gives you that effect of light hitting a corner. In this case, because they're round, I'm going to keep it where I think the light hits it the most. So we can use these spheres for all sorts of things, but what I've done is I made them into an infographic. A little bit of white text on top of them, change the size to represent the values that the infographic might represent, and a bit of text in grey at the bottom so the colour doesn't take away from the colours of our infographic. I hope you enjoyed the project. Remember, there are tons more in our Udemy course with a lot of training as well, over 12 hours. And the link is down in the description. Don't forget to subscribe to get lots more of this sort of training from us.